When the PlayStation was released, Japan and Europe and the US had completely different games. Today we're going to be looking at the European launch lineup, and in particular one title that most gamers will agree was the best. When the PlayStation was released, the games lineup wasn't necessarily the best in history, but it did have some of the world firsts and some beloved IPs that are still around today.
Let's go!
3D Lemmings is one of the first titles we're going to be looking at, and it's one in 3 titles developed by Psygnosis for the launch of PlayStation. 3D Lemmings was the start of friction between Sony and Psygnosis, because Psygnosis were releasing their titles for the competition. 3D Lemmings was also released on Sega Saturn and MS-DOS. Next up, Battle Arena Toshinden. Now, Battle Arena Toshinden was the first ever 3D weapons fighting game, and it was the prelude for games like Soul Calibur. Sony were billing this game as the Saturn killer, but only a year later it was released on the Sega Saturn and with more features. It was also one of the first cases where US customers started to complain about the quality of their front covers versus their European counterparts. Whilst the game did have several sequels, it did start to decline as high quality games like Soul Calibur and Tekken came out. Jumping Flash, one of my best release titles for the PlayStation. This was the first ever 3D platformer game as verified by the Guinness Book of Records. This game was a showcase for 3D graphics on the PlayStation, and probably one of the best titles you could get at the time of Sony PlayStation's launch. Next up we have Collect the Blood. Now this was a 3D first-person shooter, and there's nothing particularly special about this title. It did though get a lot of praise for its CG cutscenes, but when compared to games like Doom, although not true 3D, it fell short of a great first-person shooter. Nova Storm was our first conversion. Originally came out on the 3DO and Mega CD. It came on 2 discs for the PlayStation and was the only version of the game that had full screen FMV. The game came out to mediocre reviews and is the second title of 3 that was published by Psygnosis for the launch of PlayStation. Rapid Reload. This was a 2D side-scrolling shooter and was only released in Japan and Europe, and this is because the US had a policy of not releasing any games that weren't 3D on the PlayStation. Rapid Reload was probably one of the worst titles available at Sony PlayStation Europe's launch. It's Ridge Racer! Yeah. I was actually at E3 behind stage when Cad said that and came out with that internet meme. But Ridge Racer was the only title that was available in Japan, the US and Europe at launch. Ridge Racer was a port of the hugely successful arcade game, and it was one of the best titles available at launch. This game was technically extremely impressive. It was so close to the arcade original, and had an additional third-person mode that wasn't available in arcade. But if you really wanted to get the full arcade experience, you needed to buy Ridge Racer Type 4, which came with a high-spec demo of Ridge Racer, which allowed you to run the game at 60 frames per second with an NTSC TV or 50 frames per second with a PAL TV. If you got this game at launch, you wouldn't have been disappointed. And if you're thinking about getting a PlayStation to start your collection, then Ridge Racer is a great place to start. The final game we have for the European launch lineup was Wipeout. This is one of my all-time favourite games and went on to become one of the most successful franchises in Sony PlayStation's history. Wipeout was definitely the coolest game of the bunch. It featured in films like Hackers, and you can find it in UK nightclubs where you go along and play demo units of Wipeout. It was fast, it was super cool, the soundtrack was amazing, the graphics were fantastic. This was one of the best games that you could get at launch for the PlayStation. Everything about Wipeout screamed next generation. The audio track, the fact that they had Designers Republic do the graphic design for the game, the gameplay, it was even set in the future. This was such a stunning game to get at the launch of Sony PlayStation. And that's it. Those are the 8 games that came out at the launch of the European PlayStation. But hang on a minute, what was the best of those games? Well, it wasn't a game at all. It was actually a demo disc. Demo disc 1. Demo Disc 1 was a stunning piece of content. It had games, previews, video discs and tech demos. It was so good it even made the national press with the tech demos like the T-Rex here. But the killer game on this disc was Destruction Derby. Destruction Derby, developed by Reflections and published by Psygnosis. Even though this game wasn't release title, people were playing it at the launch of PlayStation on Demo Disc 1, and it went down an absolute storm. No one had seen a car racing game like this. You start off in a ring with a load of other cars and you smash the crap out of each other. It was unbelievable fun. People played this demo disc over and over again because of that. Destruction Derby may have been one of the best demos that you could play on the disc, but there were a ton of other previews and game demos that you could play as well. Let's have a look. The disc also came with previews of Starblade Alpha, Jumping Flash, Ridge Racer, Rapid Reload I guess, Twisted Metal, Warhawk and Tekken. The tech demos were also fantastic. People said that they were getting photorealistic graphics with the T-Rex and the Manta Ray demo. Psygnosis also developed a VCD visualizer. You could put your own music CDs into the PlayStation and then get some funky graphics play along to the music. So there you have it, the launch lineup for the PlayStation European release. There's some great games in there. Definitely recommend Wipeout and Ridge Racer. Jumping Flash is fantastic, but the D1 demo disc was amazing. Games like Destruction Derby, getting a glimpse of Jumping Flash, and then going in and playing around with the tech demos and looking at some of those previews was fantastic. It was definitely the best value for money and the best game disc that I played at the launch of PlayStation. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video.